Then in 1938, 1939, in San Francisco, they had what was called the Golden Gate Exposition, which was an event which rivaled the New York, the World's Fair in New York, and in the West Coast they had the Golden Gate Exposition. So the Shering Company came to Frank and said, could you please help us make an exhibit for the Golden Gate Exposition? The Shering Company was a leader in hormone preparations, and they wanted Frank to make to show off some of the female hormones. And so he said, well, he could make pictures of the hormones and the changes in the breast and changes in the uterus, but it wouldn't be a very interesting exhibit just to read about these hormones. And the one caveat was that it had to take no more than 15 minutes to walk through the exhibit. So he got the idea. He found out about a product, a very new product at the time, called plexiglass. And he said he could make a sculpture. He had studied sculpture in school, and he'd make a sculpture of a woman and project into her his pictures, project them up inside, and then he rotate the pictures that were being projected, and then also have a synchronized woman's voice explaining what was happening to her, the changes in the body. The voice was imagine Jacqueline Kennedy explaining what was happening. Very smooth woman's voice. And so he did that, and the Shering people loved it, and she was very effective, and you could actually believe that there was a baby growing inside of her. And they shipped her to San Francisco, and she had a baby every 15 minutes. And she was a big hit in the show. And after that, she went to the Museum of Science and Industry, where she had a baby till a very advanced age. And then we lost track of her. We lost track of her in the last few years. The Siebel Company came to Frank in the 1930s too. They wanted to make, he was doing some advertising work for them, and they wanted him to make a little folder. They were going to make a folder, die cut in the shape of a heart, and on the front would be the front of the heart, Frank's picture of the front of the heart, and on the back would be Frank's picture of the back of the heart, and then to open it up, it would be cross sections of the heart. And over that, they would put all the advertising text for their digitalis product for the heart preparation. So he did that, and they sent it out to all the doctors in the land, and they loved it. And they said, could you please send us some more of those little flyers? They would write letters into SIBA. Could you send us some more of those little flyers? Because we like it very much, but without all that writing all over it. So they did that. They did it. They put the flyers, and then they put the writing off to the side. And this was all, a lot of time, they got the idea to do educational writing on the side too, like an anatomy of the heart, things that they would add to these flyers. And then they made flyers for the stomach, for a stomach preparation they had, for the kidney preparation they had, and so forth. And those flyers were very popular. This is an oil painting he did of my siblings before I was born. In the early 1940s he did this. This is a very beautiful painting. Then the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And there was, all the men had to go in the service. He was only 38 years old. And he had to, or he had to sign, and had to enlist or he would have been drafted. So he decided, he knew the colonel who was in charge of the Army Medical Museum in Washington, D.C., and he went, and he told this Colonel Ash, told Frank, if you sign up, if you enlist in the Army, I'll get you assigned to the Army Medical Museum. So that's what he did, and so he went and reported to the Army Medical Museum, but they didn't have much for him to do there until General Weibel, who was over in the Pentagon, was in charge of the training all the soldiers and the armed forces. And he called up Frank and said, could you come over to the Pentagon? I have a very important job that I think you have a unique capability of doing for me. And so Frank went over to see him, General Weibel, who took out a big book and threw it down on the desk and said, this is the Army's first aid manual. It has remedies for 6 different types of snake bites, and it has 20 different ways to splint a broken arm, none of which is available in the field. So we need you to prepare something that we can use to teach these boys. We only have 8 hours to teach them how to take care of their wounds and how to take, or those of their compatriots. So Frank said he knew exactly what he would do. He would make a little booklet. It was really small. It was 3 by 4, little booklet that he would have a picture on this side and a few bullets on this side, and that was the booklet. And what they had seen in the picture, they could remember in the heat of battle. And I'm sure that saved a lot of lives. Also in the Army, there was a young surgeon who was advocating for treatment of these wounded soldiers when they came home. And that doctor was named Dr. Michael DeBakey. And he and Frank became very good friends. And Dr. DeBakey lent his knowledge, and Frank made the pictures of how to take care of these wounded the wounds. And SEBA distributed that to all the doctors in the land. So that was very good. So when the soldiers came home, the doctors who were at home could treat these wounds. But that's what started a lifelong friendship with Michael DeBakey and Frank Netter. Then in 1949, the SEBA company got the idea that they would start a publication, a periodic publication, and that was a periodical would come out 4 to 6 times a year, and the title of that was Clinical Symposia. And a lot of these were monographs, but the main feature of this publication was the Frank Netter pictures. This is a masterpiece that he did, a clinical symposia with Ernest Lamp, and it was reprinted many, many times. And you know, many artists, they can't draw hands. And if you go to the museum and you look at very fine art, and you can tell the finest artists can draw beautiful hands. And Frank Netter was a master at drawing hands. This is he did a series of psychiatric portraits that appeared in the Clinical Symposia too, with Frank A.Y.D. was the doctor's name who wrote the text. They were very famous doctors who would write the text that would go along with Frank's pictures. And whenever SEBA would ask them to do it, and nobody ever turned them down. It was getting to be very prestigious to be asked to work with Frank Netter. So there was a young doctor also in the 1950s at Philadelphia Children's Hospital, and his name was Dr. C. Everett Koop, who remember became the Surgeon General later. And he was operating on newborn babies who had anatomical anomalies that were incompatible with life. They were going to die. And he would, they were things like the esophagus was open to the trachea, or the babies had no rectum, or things, really serious things. And it was a very esoteric thing in the 50s to operate on these newborn babies like that. Up until that time, there had been nothing to do for them. And so sometimes they would come in the middle of the night emergencies. Sometimes they would be, Dr. Koop would know he's going to operate the next day, and he would call up Frank and say, could you take the train down? And then he would go down and observe the surgery in the operating room. And then Dr. Koop wrote the text, and Frank made the pictures, and that went out to all the doctors in the land. And here it was, they would go to the pediatricians and to the general practitioner, these clinical symposia. And so then they would see that these things could be done, and they could send the babies to Dr. Koop, for example, or if there was another clinical symposium, a different subject, these things could be done. So the clinical symposium was really intended for the general practitioners.